Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Modern Divorce Podcast. Today, I am joined by my friend and a fellow attorney here in Arizona, Mr. Henry Alzate. Hello, Henry.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here with you.
I'm so happy to see you. So, Henry used to work at Modern Law. Now he's out on his own running his solo practice. He's one of my favorite people. I've written about him and his adventures and his background. And we're going to get into talking about parenting plans and what the disadvantages and advantages are of strict parenting plans or very specific ones versus broad ones. But before we dive into that, Henry, will you give people just the 3 to 5 minute version of your background?
My background is I grew up in Colombia, in the Republic of Colombia, which is in South America, at the top of South America. I really like maps, so I always say the location. I grew up on a small coffee farm, run away from my parents when I was about 13 due to domestic violence. And many of you probably know we also have had what people call a civil or guerrilla war for the last 60 years. All of that contributed to my departure. I left home with a fourth grade education. Eventually, my travels took me north, and I ended up in Canada. Later, came to the United States and began my schooling, which has been wonderful. I love reading all kinds of books about history and law and politics. So naturally, I ended up in the law, and
Let's
it
just
has
stop right there. Naturally,
yeah,
Henry.
it just kind of naturally flowed towards that area, and I've been in practice 11 years doing exclusively family law and civil litigation, which, as a lot of you know, you end up with a lot of civil issues in family uh, court. Um, and I just really enjoy working with individuals. And so family law is good for me because of that, the individual connection to people.
The thing I want to tell you all about Henry is his spirit is unlike anyone I've ever met. And he is brave. He is killer in the courtroom. He is not afraid to take on a fight. And I know you just got the 3 minute version of his story, but if you get a chance to ask this man about his story, it is unlike any that you will hear anywhere else. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being here today. And
Yeah,
now we're going to talk parenting plans. So, we are going to talk about a lot of different situations, and then getting your take, Henry, on whether or not a more specific or more vague parenting plan would be better. So, for instance, we're going to talk about unmarried parents who've never lived together, people who've been married a very long time, people who have maybe an out-of-state plan, and then what we think about optional provisions, like should we discuss discipline or common routines in parenting plans. So, with that, Henry, let's start with the first situation that I want to talk about is you've got an unmarried couple. They've never lived together. They were not in a long-term relationship. They got pregnant. They're having a baby and they're going to figure out how to navigate being co-parents without ever being in a relationship. What type of a parenting plan should they consider?
I'm so glad that you started with that one, with the unmarried parents. Um, One of the issues that comes up is often problematic due to lack of trust because these parents did not live together. They did not learn a lot about one another. So I run into this issue of one of the parents not trusting the other. So one of the things that listeners, uh, people who are going to be looking at this should be thinking of is what is the level of trust that they have. And often one parent feels like they are more experienced at managing a child, and so sometimes there is issues of control, of letting go, and also how close are these parents to one another? What is the logistics? Are we looking at one parent, living in Surprise, the other one living in Mesa, and transporting a young child? We haven't said how young the child is, but obviously it begins at birth. It can be a baby, the child can be a baby or a 2-year-old. So I think the issue of trust plays into how specific you want to get. Um, and being able to trust the other parent. It happens a lot to fathers, for example, because the mother gets attached to the baby, and for correct reasons. And so there can be reasonable restrictions on the father's parenting time due to the age of the child. It's just important that it be, properly related to the judge if it gets to the point, if it has to be to the judge. One area that I think should be very specific, because there is different areas that should not be too specific, others should be very specific. And one of the areas that should be specific is transportation arrangements, pick up and drop off of the child. Very important. And also for school, if the child is of school age, or for daycare. This is a continuous source of problems and frustration for parents, because sometimes they don't put a lot of specificity into this arrangement. So that's all I have, and unless you have other questions, but I think trust and the logistic issues, and certain transportation, etc., should be more specific. And then of course the parents should be aware, and our audience should be aware, that these plans should be revisited at least once a year, maybe more, as the child grows older, to accommodate for new things that are happening.
So I think that's all fantastic, but when there isn't trust, because you've never lived together, you've never raised children together, you don't know each other that well. When you don't have trust, should your parenting plan be specific on areas like, for instance, let's take the young baby, for example. Should you have in your parenting plan that dad will only feed the baby breast milk from bottles and not formula until it's discussed with mom? Should that type of specific provision be in a parenting plan? Or baby has sensitive skin or eczema, and this is the only type of soap we're going to use? Should that level of specificity be in a parenting plan, or how should that be tackled?
I think that's very important. I've had that issue come up, where the mother feels like she's more experienced, sometimes because it is true that the mother is more experienced, sometimes just by virtue of having given birth to the baby, you might feel like, I know more, and the father doesn't know as much. This happens. And I think that level of specificity should be included if the parents agree. The problem is a lot of times they don't agree. The one parent, the one parent says, you know what, I don't want to be told what to do. Just drop the kid off. So I just want to say I'll have the child from 6 to whatever time and leave me alone. So they don't want to have anything to do, because, again, the issue of trust. they haven't had a relationship. So if you feel strongly, about the ointment that should be applied to the child, if that's important, if there is a skin condition,
Mhm,
the breast milk comes up all the time.
mhm,
I want my child fed only breast milk for
mhm.
this particular time. I think that issue should go to the judge if it's important enough for the parent. It should go to the judge, and the judge will take into consideration, because remember this, folks, always the best interest of the child is the most important thing. So if you can make a good argument, and always begin with Arizona Revised Statute 25403. That's a really important, no matter what you're doing in a custody case, you should always begin from there.
Mhm, mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. All right, that's fantastic. Now, how does your answer change if we've got a different couple? This couple's been married for 15 years. They have 3 children. They've raised these children together. The kids are, let's say, 12, 9, and 5. Now, should your parenting plan be specific on issues like how we're going to discipline our kids, how we're going to eat them, what schedule they're on, or should it be vague?
I think that the more specificity that you can agree to is very important,
Mm,
because one of the issues, and for children that age, is to have consistency
mhm,
between the two households. One of the biggest thorns on the side of parents is one parent wants the children in bed, unplugged from TV, from technology at a certain time, say 8 p.m., 9 p.m. The other parent might be like, whatever, I don't care. They can go to bed at 10, 11, whatever. And it creates issues. One parent has open access to cell phones, the other one doesn't. So if the people, in that 15 years, they build any kind of trust about parenting, then perhaps they'll be able to be more flexible. In other words, do we really have a conflict? Is
mhm,
this a real conflict, or
mhm,
is this a matter of, I'm standing on my principle, you're standing on your principle, so there is no compromise? Is it that, or do we have a real problem, right? Because if you have persistent conflict, you may need the assistance of a parenting coordinator. That's someone appointed by a court to make conflict decisions with more speed than a court.
mhm,
So I'm like, I need an answer by Monday morning. Can
mhm,
I take the child to this uh, extracurricular activity, doctor appointment? It comes up in so many ways. These conflicts creep in unexpected ways, and also in very expected ways, like education, religion, etc. You should document any persistent disagreements, and it may be the case that you'll have to go to court for a modification to gain more control and more certainty for the children.
mhm, mhm,
One of the things that judges look at in situations like that is, what are the conflicts about,
mhm,
and how are the parties behaving? Each party, do we have good faith, or is this just continuous bickering? Um, Remember, folks, there is many ways to parent well.
mm,
Just because the way you're parenting doesn't exactly coincide with the other parents, that should not necessarily be a problem. Uh, I think I always ask people, what is the purpose of this disagreement? Does the disagreement affect something that is core to the child, like nutrition, schooling, sports, travel, religion, big things. And there is other things. That's not an exhaustive list.
Yeah, I think that that is a great point. I tend to advise when there are two good parents. I tend to advise to leave the specificity out because many times having specificity can lead to spying, lots of questioning. Was your dad following the parenting plan? Did you go to bed at 8 o'clock like you were supposed to?
Yeah.
Did you do your homework? It says in the parenting plan you have to do your homework. So when I have two good parents, I tend to recommend that we don't put those things in. Um, but when there is one parent that really doing isn't meeting the children's needs, and that's what you were talking about, figure out what's important. If dad wants to have parenting time, but he's not doing homework with your kiddo, and the kiddo's got a learning disability and has to do homework every day, then maybe that needs to get in the parenting plan. And that's different from just saying, it's very important to me that you eat dinner every night at 6 o'clock, because that's when we ate dinner. And so we better eat dinner at 6 o'clock.
That's right. That's right. This is an important point. The type of parents and also the type of issue. What are we dealing with? Some of these issues cannot wait. The doing homework thing that can accumulate
Right,
very quickly and become a crisis.
right,
Um, so
right.
it's very important. And I do agree with you that, not getting too specific, with two people who are not very conflictive. They're just not very conflictive. Uh, so it doesn't really have to be that precise. I do agree with you on that. But it can get very vitriolic. I run into issues a lot with extracurricular activities.
Hmm.
Like one parent is on board and really wants to do it and believes this is core to the child, and the other parent is like, you know, I can't do it. You know why? Because they remarried.
Yeah,
Think about these folks, the role and the impact that remarriage often has in these custodial relationships. The guy's got a new wife, new babies. He can be driving around doing soccer, swimming, all these other activities. The other parent still believes that this has got to be very important, and priorities have changed for the other parent. So that may be an appropriate time for a modification, that kind of thing to provide the other parent a little more control.
I think that you bring up such a good point, because when you are getting divorced, or you're getting divorced, life was a certain way, you had certain priorities, you lived your life, according to a certain set of rules. And then if somebody does move farther away, or they get a new job, or they get a new wife, or they get a new husband, and their logistical um, priorities become different, you get into a real problem. So if your child is very involved in swimming, or has done club soccer for the last 4 years, and that was very important to you in your marriage, it might be something that you want to consider keeping in your parenting plan, because that memorializes right away, this is important to us, this is a value we share, and we're going to lock it in.
Indeed.
So, in general, when there's more conflict, do you think it's more important for specificity when there's more conflict?
Yes, taking into consideration the kind of conflict is really is difficult. It's difficult because you really got to look inside and think, okay, is this an adult fight, or are we really fighting about the children? You'd be surprised the number of feelings and emotions that remain from the pain of the adult relationship ending. And those pains and frustrations can often poison and diminish the view of the children's issues and how it affects them. Very important. I mean, I have people who sometimes get a cell phone for the kid, and they're like, well, because I'm paying for the cell phone, your dad or your mom cannot talk to you on it. And it can become very difficult and create what I call like poison in the water, right? You're taking an issue that, yes, it's important. I understand you're paying $80 and you feel like, why should this bomb of the other parent access my child's cell phone when I'm the one paying it? But that can create a lot of issues. And that's just one example. There is many like that where it can be a smaller issue and it grows into something bigger.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I want to talk about that. Do you think that your parenting plan should include provisions about cell phone use, internet use, social media? What?
Yes,
Okay, tell me
yes,
about that.
yes. I think if you can have an open conversation, and especially the people that live together 15 years, they should have a working communication, which hopefully they do. They should talk about, okay, well, some parents are like 9 years old. Here is a cell phone, no problem. Some other parents are appalled. They're like, no, 16, right? So
Right.
talk about it, right? So maybe we can say, okay, you want 16, I want 9. Well, how about we settle kind of in the middle and say, 13 and a half, they can have cell phones if you can agree to that. That would be great.
True. I think when kids are going back and forth between houses, they end up getting cell phones much earlier, much younger than maybe they would if they were in an intact household. And it's because your kids are making more transitions now. And let's say your kids even traveling out of state, like they're going to need a cell phone to communicate. And so many times they end up getting cell phones earlier. Now, I think it's especially important to talk about, well, what kind of phone? Just because they have a phone, does it mean they should have internet access? Does it mean they should have a Facebook account and an Instagram account? And if that's not discussed in advance, it can cause a lot of problems for parents.
Yes, and if you feel, like now you can predict, right? Because now we've been exposed to these platforms and the cell phones, we know more in advance. So if you can predict those issues and you're fighting it in court, bring it up to the judge. Okay, the judge, this is what I believe about my child's access to the internet, to Facebook, to many other platforms that are now, there's a myriad of them, Discourse, you name it. So if you're unable to agree, remember, always you can take it, and by reading 25403, it fits in there. I mean, that is a long list of factors that the judge is supposed to consider, and it fits in there. It fits in the family dynamics. It fits in terms of logistics. Well, my child is traveling for soccer or wrestling. They need that cell phone. So you establish the need. Another one is, what if you had a lot of domestic violence? In that 15-year-old marriage, maybe we have some trust issues where it's like, I don't want to be calling my husband every time I want to talk to my kids.
Yeah.
That comes up a lot, the accessibility
Yeah.
and the privacy of the conversation. If I give my kid a cell phone, I can call them whenever I want,
Mhm.
and they can call me whenever they want if they feel weird because, dad was an alcoholic or had a lot of domestic violence, maybe did crack, cocaine. These are other considerations, other circumstances that affect how you should deal with the communication issue.
Mhm. You bring up a great point. Um, on one hand, we're talking about parenting preferences. On the other hand, we're talking about safety planning. Because if your kids are now moving back and forth between houses or traveling, they've got more responsibility than they used to have. And so part of it is a safety thing. Can they get a hold of people they need to get a hold of? And then if you've got parents who are dealing with addiction or violence, then you truly have to make sure that your child has the ability to contact you. And
Yes.
you also want to make sure that the other parent isn't taking away their cell phone when they're at that house to deny you contact. This is so hard
And
because
they do. Many of them do remove the cell phone, often to punish the other parent.
it's
Because,
true.
and often also, one parent will say, well, let's get a cell phone, let's pay together. The
Mhm.
one parent says, nah, and the other parent gets a cell phone for the kid,
Mhm.
and the other parent comes to me and says, oh my God, she violated the order. Look, she got the kid a cell phone without my permission, and that's usually a non-starter. You
Right.
go to court and you whine about, oh, she got a cell phone without my permission. That's not going to advance your case
It's not.
very far.
Right.
That's one of those areas where you got to ask yourself, is this a real conflict, right? Do we really have a problem? Is the problem that the cell phone was purchased, or is the problem that I'm being prevented from reaching my kid on the cell phone? So it can get very minutely into the details of how you manage all of those situations.
It's
And
true. And it can go both ways. You can have those parents that want to be connected to their child 24/7. And they're constantly contacting their child when the child's with the other parent. And that you can get into, a parent obstructing the other parent's parenting time through contact on the cell phone, which is the opposite end of the coin. And both are problematic.
I'm so glad you brought that up. We actually see that problem more than I like to admit it. But parent A sends the kid to parent B with an iPad, a cell phone, a module, a deep sea diving suit, like all kinds of equipment, right? And then as soon as the kid arrives there, and I'm going to add this, let's make it out of state. Kid goes from Arizona to North Carolina, loaded with all kinds of goodies. Well, here comes mom. Hey, baby, time for your bath. Mommy's going to be with you on the iPad. Well, dad wants to do the bath. Dad only sees the kid like 2 weeks every year and is desperate to connect. And mom is in Arizona, kind of going, oh my God, he's kind of a stranger, only sees the kid, twice a year or 2 weeks. So she feels like she's got to be there, like watching out for the kid. Now, see, this is problematic. This is like letting go, or not. This is what creates conflict, and we see that a lot.
It's true. And there's no easy answer, because if your parenting plan says the child has to have access to a cell phone, that seems like a fine thing to do. But I can tell you, every Sunday before my kids go to their dad's on Monday, we do a week on, week off. I have to take my teenagers' cell phones and then I give them back when their room is clean, because it's the only way that they're going to clean their room. And it's very effective. Taking a kid's cell phone is extremely effective. Now, if I had in my parenting plan something that said I had to give my children access to cell phones, would I be violating it?
You would probably not, if it's incidental to the management of your household and encouraging them to do the chores. I think that'd be a reasonable restriction. Something like the kid shall have a cell phone on his person at all times. That doesn't guarantee that the kid is going to answer at all times. So I've have had very specific parenting plans that say, okay, when the kid is with mom in Texas, mother shall be entitled to open and free. Often they use language like this, like open and free. The court sometimes puts it in there, or generous communication, or robust communication. And then 2 years later, you're back in court and like, what does that mean?
Right.
Does that mean she's got to, the guy has got to be calling the kid, 3 times a day while he's in Texas? Is that what robust communication means? So I think, one of the things that is very helpful, I've seen it work very well, is to provide a window of time for the important phone call. So, for example, while child is with mom in Texas, father shall be able to contact the child, at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. or anytime from 7 to 8, have a nice window of time available. And unfortunately, some of them get even more specific, where it's like in a place that is undisturbed and free of noise, because sometimes the other parents start banging pots and pans to interrupt the communication with the child. So what I want to say is that if you're gonna act out and you're gonna behave in certain objectionable ways, no amount of specificity is gonna deter you from it. What it's going to do is that it's gonna help the other parent to eventually go to court and enforce it. So one of the things you gotta be looking for when you're interested in specificity is, how is it going to assist you? If you're already predicting some problems, you want specificity because that's how you get enforcement.
Mhm.
If the plan just says robust communication,
Right.
that's very hard to enforce. But when you have a window of time that says the father or the mother may call the child from 6 to 8, and that window of time, and the child shall be available, that works
It
for enforcement if there is persistent violations.
That is a wonderful point, and, it really the thing that is important is that the parenting plan has to be specific to you and your dynamic and your children. If you've got violence considerations, you want the child to have access to the cell phone at all times. It's extremely important as part of a safety plan. If you don't have those issues, then maybe just simply having a window is your very best bet. And you want to be able, let's say you find that your kids are looking at porn or using the cell phone inappropriately. You want to be able to restrict that and lock it down, talk to the other parent about it. So you have to really think about your personal circumstances. How old are the kids? If you enter a parenting plan when your child is 5, it's not going to be the same parenting issues you have when your child's 15. So how do you recommend parents deal with that?
That's an excellent point. First of all, I just want to, before I forget, for people representing themselves, often, the court has a form. That's a form parenting time. Most of that is for you to use as a model. As Billy just mentioned, this has got to deal with your specific situation. So don't think when you see that form plan that, oh, this is it, I just sign at the bottom and that's it. No, sit down, think about it, really work through those specifics. And on your point about, the child is 5, I think as the child grows, you have to go back for a modification, or invite the other parent to modify. You should always do that. I always advise clients to go to the other parent with the issue.
Mhm,
Okay, Joey is looking at porn. How are we going to manage that? Or
mhm,
this is happening and it's interfering. Can
mhm.
we work together? Give the parent the opportunity. Try not to be confrontational. I try to be, kind of opening the door to talk. And then if that doesn't work, unfortunately, you'll have to go to court or ask for mediation, which, by the way, is very successful at resolving conflicts.
I agree with you completely. I think these types of issues are some of the best for mediation because ultimately both parents love their children and both parents want the best for their children. And they may have a different way of going about it, but there's often common ground in the fact that you both love your children. Couple other questions for you. Um, do you think that it is appropriate or important to have some guidelines about how you will discipline your children?
Very, very important. If possible, get on the same page and use the same methods of communication for older children, the 13, 14, often removal of the cell phone, until you clean your room or clean the house. For my kids, it's clean the house. I have 2 kids. They're fully capable of
Mhm,
cleaning the house.
mhm,
Uh, so try to agree on it. This is the method of discipline we're going to use, and see if you can get on the same page.
mhm,
Often it's not possible. One parent wants to use corporal punishment, the
mhm,
other one doesn't. And so it just depends on the level of severity. I want to share with our listeners that corporal punishment is a big no-no in court. Once you go to family court and somebody says, well, he spanked the kid, or that's not good. Even though Under a separate statute in the Arizona Code, you have the right as a parent to restrain your children and to punish them, including physical force, reasonable physical force. Once you're in family court, the judge doesn't go with that. They usually say no corporal punishment.
Yeah, it's true. And I think if you are a parent, this can be really hard in a number of circumstances. Um, it can be really hard when you have a difficult child. So when a couple has a child that has been diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder or ADHD or has a history of really challenging behavior, it can be more important in that situation to lock down a discipline plan than ever. And I think it is generally a good idea. I think it's almost always a good idea if you have any concerns to agree in advance and put it in the parenting plan, no corporal punishment, because this invites so much litigation. If you are the parent that believes in corporal punishment, you are at risk of being accused of child abuse, and you are at risk of crossing the line because nobody knows where it is and it depends on the judge you have. And if you are the parent that doesn't want corporal punishment and you find out your child's been spanked, you could very, easily be end up in litigation, and you never know which way it's going to go.
Yeah, that brings up an important point. Folks don't automatically run to CPS. In so many circumstances, the one parent, oh, you spanked the kid, or he yelled at the kids, and immediately they go to CPS and they report to CPS. Why am I saying this? Well, I should be saying run to CPS. I'm not, because CPS will not just look at the parent you're accusing. They will look at you as well. So expect them to come to your house, and that there are no cockroaches hiding under the cupboards and that you got enough food. So what you're doing is you're inviting more government scrutiny into your private life. Let's do it if you have a legitimate concern.
Mhm,
The kid comes over with bruises
mhm,
or is burnt. There is also mental abuse. A lot of parents do it subtly,
mhm.
just calling the kid fat or stupid. They don't beat the kid, but the psychological manipulation can be just as bad. But I advise caution when invoking CPS. And one little tip for folks out there is don't use your new wife or husband as the communicator with your ex. Try not to bring your new, clean, beautiful relationship and mix it in with your previous failed relationship. Try to keep this. And I know some guys are like, oh, I can't talk to my ex-wife. She drives me crazy. Well, that's your ex-wife. It's not your new wife's ex-wife. So that's just a little tip off the cuff there for people.
I think
And
you're absolutely right. And I want to echo that your new spouse or boyfriend should never, ever, ever, ever be the primary disciplinarian.
very important as well. Very important as well. If you
It's
have a new wife that was divorced from someone else, stay away from disciplining her children. They are not your children, so you technically don't have those rights. And second, you can hurt her in her relationship with her ex by interfering. I usually tell people, try to be a friend, bring in some wisdom of adulthood to this other child, but don't discipline them. Excellent point.
yeah.
That's a good pointer.
If you can think of them like your nieces and nephews, you love your nieces and nephews, you want to impart wisdom, you want to support them, but in no way is it your job to be the boss or the disciplinarian, and that will save you from a lot of heartache. One other thing, if you've got a situation where you're really concerned about your child at another parent's house, maybe it's psychological abuse, maybe it's physical abuse, getting a counselor involved before you go to family court can be really helpful if they're not in an emergency situation. What do you think about that? When do you think a counselor should get involved?
A counselor should get involved when there is a legitimate concern, such as self-harm,
Mm,
and other issues.
mhm,
But
mhm,
I'm just using that as an example.
mhm, mhm,
And the second thing is, don't wait for litigation to begin
mhm,
before you engage the services of a counselor.
mhm,
A lot of people will tell you that, which I agree with, that children suffer during the divorce. And they are often, it is the case that many children from divorce attend counseling,
mhm.
specifically to cope with this new situation. But don't wait until litigation ensues, because then it just looks like you're trying to set up some kind of evidence, and unfortunately, a lot of people do that. They file suit and then they start counseling on Monday to create a file. Just do it because your child needs it, and maybe you too need it, and do it, and it'll be helpful, hopefully.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. If you can do more than a he said, she said, if you can get some objective third parties, it's a good idea. Okay, we are running out of time and I have more questions, but Henry, I could talk to you forever. Um, do you think there should be that mom and dad should be required to communicate? Sometimes judges will enter into an order that, there has to be a weekly email exchange between mom and dad. Do you think that's necessary or important, or should it go in the parenting plan?
That's I often cringe at that, because you have two parents who absolutely hate one another. And I'm going for the worst of the cases, right? They hate one another. They don't have anything nice to say, and there is nothing to report. So I actually like it to be, when I go to court, I say to the judge, okay, Your Honor, I know you're going to say, yeah, weekly email on Sunday, like the worst day. I mean, that's the day you're trying to decompress, and now you got to send an email to your ex. I'm like, Judge, can we say if there is something to report? If
I'm
everybody went to school, everybody ate their lunch, everybody blew their noses and sang, there is nothing to report. Well, if Joey broke his leg and I took him to the hospital on Wednesday, then yes, that merits an email. But let's not communicate just to communicate. So I do agree that's useful, but when it's rigid like that, like you must do it on Sundays, it can be a problem.
I totally agree with you. I think you should communicate when there's a legitimate issue. And the hard part is determining what a legitimate issue is. So, whether or not you're signing your kids up for sports is a legitimate issue. Hey, we got this thing from the school. I'm going to think about registering them. Is that okay with you? That's a legitimate issue. Go ahead and email.
Yes.
But you're right. Did they eat dinner? Did they do their thing? Did they do their homework? Why you got to send an email just to send an email?
Yeah, and sometimes it occurs like this, that the lazy parent, and I don't mean this as an offense, but one parent is very communicative with the children. They know everything. Oh my God, Carla's got a boyfriend, or one of the kids wants to transition to be a girl. They know the other parent doesn't know anything. They don't talk to the kids. It's like, oh, hi, how you doing? So they go to court and they want that Sunday email as a way for them to learn about the kids.
Oh,
They
interesting.
don't they, they don't maximize the time that they have with the children to learn about the children, often because they are working too much. The other parent is not working as much. It's very important to look at the dynamics. I always get into it like, okay, is this guy working two jobs? Sometimes the guy is working at night. So, and then comes home and goes to sleep, never really gets to know the kids. So he's waiting anxiously for a Sunday email so that he can learn about his kids. Finally, very often, this is a responsibility imposed on a custodial parent. In other words, the parent that's got physical custody most of the time and sometimes has sole legal decision making. They are loaded with the responsibility to report to the other parent what's going on. And sometimes that's fair, because the kid is spending 80% or 70% of the time with mom or dad. So it seems fair that they should report a little bit to the other parent that's got less time. And I think that's how judges came up with that provision.
That's a really good point, and I had not thought about that, but it might be that if you are a long distance parent, having a weekly email might be really, really useful because everybody's caught up in their lives, but you want to keep in touch. You want to know what's going on. And so I think in that case, having that weekly email would be really beneficial for that out of state parent.
Yes, yes, and it comes up very importantly. The out of state parents, the guy is in Washington State, the woman is in Florida. She's got the child all the time. The guy has the child maybe in the summer.
Mhm.
So that weekly email becomes very, very important. So important that the judge will hold the party to it and sometimes punish that parent if they don't comply with that.
It makes sense to me because, you know, I have a week on, week off parenting time schedule, but if somebody didn't see their kid for 3 months, a lot happens in 3 months. But if you just had a weekly check-in, you could kind of see what was happening with them and understand, are they do they have a new best friend at school? Are they loving the chess club they just started? Like, new interesting things that matter to kids. So I am so glad you brought that up. I hadn't thought about it before, and I'm going to include it in every long distance parenting plan I do.
Yes, it's very important with the long distance because often what occurs, and again, this is no disrespect, it's just what happens with human nature. Parent A gets remarried.
Hmm.
So now they have a new ideal,
Hmm.
right? A new love, and they are so focused on that. The last thing they want to do is write an email to some guy in Washington,
Right.
right? It's like, the dad. So it begins to close. The guy from Washington becomes very disconnected
Yeah.
from his child. And so it's important to send that. And it doesn't have to be a very detailed report. I
Hmm.
would suggest using bullet points.
Hmm.
Like he played soccer on Monday. Oh my God, he scored a goal. Like get to the point, no
Yes.
meandering, just boom, report what
Yeah.
happened, send it, kaboom.
Yeah, I like it. Last question. There are services called Our Family Wizard or ProperCom that parties are sometimes ordered to use to communicate. And sometimes parties just agree to use Our Family Wizard or ProperCom. What do you think about those services and when do you think people should use them?
I think they are very useful in a highly conflictive relationship. And I'm talking about the kind of relationship where you do not want to talk to your ex and he doesn't want to talk to you, and even beyond where there is hate. So many times the complaint comes up. Well, she had a doctor's appointment. She didn't let me know in advance. Okay, this is very important because medical and education are some of the most litigated issues and the extracurricular activities, right?
Mhm.
The guy or the woman says, well, I didn't know she had a game on Thursday. So some of these platforms, My Family Wizard and some others, allow you to plug in those dates. That also fulfills, often for the custodial parent, fulfills the responsibility to keep the other parent informed. Hey,
True.
Joey is going to have a soccer match or wrestling match on Friday, Saturday. Here is the address. Here is boom, it's right there. So it also provides reliable information for the judge to verify later that you did it, because one of the allegations is she didn't do it or
Mhm.
he didn't do it, and then they go, oh my God, I have an email here. Next thing you know, you got 1,000 pages of emails and text for the judge. That's no good. You want to get straight to the point. So that kind of documentation, you can show it to the judge, and the judge goes, well, you did what you were supposed to do. So
That's a great advice. If you've got a couple where, one or both of them feel really manipulated by the use of information or decisions regarding children. I talked to a couple the other day where both people have their own pediatricians and take the kid to a different pediatrician, and there was an issue where the child was going to be vaccinated twice because there was no communication between the pediatricians.
Yeah, see, that's how ridiculous it can get.
It
So
really can.
yes, you can get as ridiculous as possible. And that's a great example of the two pediatricians. Another issue, this is very important, and then I'll stop, is when you have a child with disabilities or
Yes.
special education needs.
Mhm.
Hey, we're having an IEP meeting on Wednesday. Well, 2 months later, the guy comes to me and is like, I didn't even know. My ex-wife went to this meeting with the teachers, the principal, the whole team, created this education plan that now I'm supposed to participate in, and I wasn't included. So one way to cut that out is to put it in my family wizard, and okay, IP meeting in 2 weeks, and the guy doesn't show up. Well, you didn't show up. You chose not to participate. So it's a powerful tool, not only to comply with court orders, but also to document your willingness and your good faith, and to counter any arguments that you didn't comply. So I would suggest using it even if you don't have conflict. It just makes it really nice because both parties are able to look at the same information. So I think even in the absence of conflict, it can be a useful tool, especially if you got 2, 3, 4 kids. You don't want to be writing emails. Well, this is what's happening. I think it's useful to have it all in one place.
Henry, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. This was a fantastic episode and a really good chat. And we will make sure that people know how to get a hold of you in the notes. But actually, before we close, how can people reach you?
Well, they can reach me at my cell phone, which I'm going to give you right now. Hang on. And it seems like we touched on a lot of things, but we barely scratched the surface. You can get really even deeper into these issues. So it's important to consult, competent counsel for specific questions. My phone number is 602-290-5487, and I'm Henry Alzate.
Thank you so much, Henry. Enjoy your week.
You're very welcome. You have a wonderful week as well.